Well, good evening, everybody. I'm just going to wait a couple more minutes. We still have some people signing in and then we'll get started. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started because Brigadier General Traver has a great talk for us and I don't want to cut into any of his time. So for those of you who do not know me, my name is Lenny Enzel. I am a retired Army nurse and I will be your moderator for this evening. This is our 12th webinar in our continuing series of linking Army Nurse Corps officers, past and present, which is in concert with our mission to preserve the past, capitalize on the present, and embrace the future. So I'll move ahead with introducing our great speaker. I've really enjoyed getting to know him as we prepared for this. Brigadier General Traver is a native of Chatham, New York, and he began his military career in June of 1986 as an enlisted ENT tech, where he served at both Landstuhl and Walter Reed. And then he reenlisted in 1990 to be an infantryman, 11 Bravo. For those of you who know what they do, he's really down on the ground, knowing what's going on. He was commissioned into the Army Nurse Corps in 1993. And of course, as you can imagine, he had a list of increasing responsibility positions. In 2007, he entered the AGR and again had many important positions, to include the Assistant Chief of Staff and Director of Reserve Affairs at OTSG. He deployed in support of Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Freedom Sentinel, where he served as the commander of the 3rd Multifunctional Medical Battalion, Provisional in Bagram, and had medical command and control over all Army echelons above the brigade medical forces in the theater. In addition, he was dual-hatted as the deputy commander of Joint Task Force Afghanistan. He got his bachelor's from the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. He has a master's in public administration from Marist College, a master's of strategic studies from the U.S. Army War College, from which he was a distinguished graduate. And he also has a postgraduate certificate in healthcare management from Columbia Southern University. So you can see he is no slouch. And without further ado, I am going to turn it over to him. We will do our questions at the end of his presentation. So thank you for so many of you joining us.
Thanks, Lenny. So first, I want to say thank you to Colonel Gossman for reaching out to me, our president at ENCA, and for the team that helped put this together. Colonel CJ Moore, Colonel Lenny Enzel, Nikki McCasland, and I really appreciate you all taking the time to put all this together for me. So it's really rough to hear your bio. What I realize is this is year 38. And so I tell everybody when they get nervous when they see the star, and I just tell them, you know what this really means? I'm old. I'm old for the Army anyway. So, humble beginnings to start, and nothing has changed. I'm just a little bit older, and I'm really, really happy to be here. So I did see General Links on the line, my mentor. So, ma'am, I'm glad to have you out here. No pressure now on me, of course, that I know you're in the audience. So we'll see if we can do this. But if you see anything or hear anything and you want to add, ma'am, please pop in. Okay, let's start with the slides. And next slide, please. So this evening, what I'm going to do is spend some time. I know there's a bunch. I did take a quick look. There's a bunch of reserve personnel on the line. So just stick with me for a few minutes, folks. We have some folks that may or may not know much about the reserve structure. So I'm going to spend a little time kind of going through top to bottom Army Reserve structure, talk a little bit about our generating and operating force from a medical standpoint, and then we'll dig into the nursing specifically. So next slide. All right, so really fast here. See if we can do this quickly. So this is the Army Reserve patch chart anyway. Gives you an idea. We're 29 two-star commands, all direct reporting to the commanding general of the Army Reserve, who's Lieutenant General Jody Daniels. She's dual-hatted. She is the chief of the Army Reserve, in which she reports to the chief of staff of the Army. That's her strategic role. And then she's also commanding general of Army Reserve Command, in which she reports to General Pappas at Forces Command, and that's her operational role. You can see we've broken our commands into two different types of commands. We have geographic commands on the left side of your screen and functional commands on the right side. So geographic commands, really quickly, those four top patches, the readiness divisions, for those on the active component, think of those as installation management commands, IMCOMs. In the Army Reserve, those commands basically handle all of our base operational support. We've got the country broken down into 4 regions, and each one of those commands have one of those regions. They manage all of our facilities and provide a lot of the support that you would normally get on an installation from Installation Command. We have the first Mission Support Command down there in the bottom left. They're out in Puerto Rico. They have command and control of all forces in the Caribbean. And then we have 2 geographic combatant commands that are actually assigned to Army Service Component Commands. We have the 7th in Europe, which is aligned to support U.S. Army Europe Africa, and we have the 9th in Hawaii, which is aligned to U.S. Army Pacific. On the right-hand side are our functional commands, and what I mean by functional is exactly that. What you'll notice as you go through the patch chart is each unit has a specific function. For instance, 200 MP Command. They have command and control over every MP soldier in the Army Reserve across the entire United States. From medical, we have 3 commands. We're all direct reporting commands. None of them are currently superior to any of the others. We have the 3rd Medical Command that I'm currently assigned to in Atlanta, Georgia. We have the 807th out in Salt Lake City. Both of those are MTO, or they basically are units or commands that have all deployable structure. And then we have Army Reserve Medical Command down in Pinellas Park, Florida, which has all of our TDA structure, our CONUS-based support capabilities. And I'll talk a little bit about that in just a second. Go to the next slide. So this is kind of how we're force arrayed across the country. You can see when you look at the map, the 4 different colored regions, that represents each of those readiness divisions regions of responsibility for base operations and support. And then you can kind of get a feel for where our commands are located. Some of the commands have units across, the entire United States. As I mentioned, for medical, we have 3 medical commands. 3rd Medical Command has all deployable capability east of the Mississippi, with the exception of Ohio. So Maine down to Louisiana. It's about 100 units and 7,000 soldiers altogether. The 807th, our sister command out in Salt Lake, has everything west of the Mississippi plus Ohio. They're about 10,500 strong and about 130 units. And then we have Army Reserve Medical Command in Pinellas, Florida. And as I mentioned, they have all of the non-deployable TDA CONUS support structure across the entire United States. We're going to dig into each one of those commands here just in a second. So this is kind of how we're force arrayed. Next slide, please. All right, so I want to break it down by generating force, medical generating force, and medical operating force. We'll start with medical generating force. And this is Army Reserve Medical Command that I just mentioned. And what I want you to be cautious of, for those that are familiar with the regular Army, U.S. Army Medical Command, Army Reserve Medical Command is not the same thing. It's an equal partner with the other 2 commands currently in the Army Reserve. They have a very unique mission, a very important mission. That mission is morphed over the last few years. So we'll talk about the mission today. And then when I get a little deeper into slides, we'll talk about their prior mission and kind of how that mission changes impacted nursing. So Air MedCom has 2 primary missions. One on the left-hand side is force generation. And what do I mean by that? Well, their primary role right now is to provide medical capabilities to all what we call the mobilization force installation. Mobilization, MFGI, force, mobilization force, I'm drawing a blank. MFGI sites, what we used to call MOL platforms, excuse me. So you can see that there's 42 medical support units there, and that's their primary role. They have teams that will go in, and if you're not aware, reserve component, Guard and Reserve, cannot deploy overseas without being cleared by 1st Army first. And so Air MedCom provides the medical teams at those MOL platforms. They do the assessment and either give the go, no go for medical clearance for soldiers and units to be able to deploy. They are basically led by a battalion organization, which is currently called the MORU. I know we have some crazy names here, but just think of that as a battalion headquarters. There's 10 of them. And those MORUs report to 4 different medical area readiness support groups or medical groups, which are 06 commands and basically brigade equivalents. We also have troop medical clinics, which are exactly what they are, what they say, what everybody's familiar with, TMC. They provide Role 1 capabilities at the mobilization platform, supporting the units that are there, providing those mobilization generation capabilities. And then there's blood and veterinary support detachments, and they're a little different than what you might think. The blood support detachments are basically wartime surge for the blood donor centers around the country, and the veterinary support detachments are the same for the public health centers. So AR Medcom has primarily a force generating mobilization kind of function. In addition, some of those soldiers become our roundouts for our deploying MTO structure, for our deploying hospital centers, field hospitals, forward surgical, resuscitative surgical detachments, and the like. But their primary mission is to get everybody else out the door, first and foremost. On the right-hand side of the slide is the other portion of AR Medcom's responsibility, and it falls out on the collective training side. So they have a one-star headquarters down at Fort Sam Houston called Medical Readiness and Training Command, and they're responsible for the collective training, primarily the reserve force, but they also support active component, National Guard, and our joint partners across the world. They're really known for helping plan, lead, and conduct major collective training exercises, something we call regional medic and global medic, which is a joint accredited collective exercise conducted up at Fort McCoy, Wisconsin, and out at Camp Parks in Fort Hunter Liggett, California. This is the premier training that we have for collective training that we have for the medical components. I would put it kind of on an NTC scale, but for medical. It's basically our ability to take large formations, usually at least one brigade. Most of the time, there's two brigades and sometimes a third notional brigade in play with all of their capabilities spread out in the battlefield. And we exercise patient movement from point of injury through theater evac. And it gives us an opportunity to work command and control and everything from A to Z through the collective training process. Medical Readiness and Training Command supported by 3 training brigades, and then you can see 7 different support training battalions. We have exercise and now training support battalions. And then they're also supported by 3 regional training sites medical. Now Fort Eisenhower, formerly Fort Gordon, Fort McCoy, Wisconsin, and again, Camp Parks, California. Those regional training sites medical house all of our training equipment sets, our hospital sets, our augmentation sets, and a lot of high fidelity simulation capability that are brought to bear for those collective training exercises to help enable them. They're resourced with biomedical maintenance folks. They've got rolling stock. They've got mechanics, instructors. They have mobile training teams that can go around and do training for reserve units on weekends. And they also provide low density MOS training. A true force provider and a very, very important piece of the mission for us. And then the final piece of AR Medcom's capability is a little unique command called AMED Professional Management Command, or APMC. I had the opportunity to command this unit, and I used to tell everybody it's the most well-loved and organization in all of the Army Reserve, and I say that facetiously because it's the most misunderstood command in the entire Army Reserve, and generally the cause of a lot of angst for most commanders, and I'll tell you why. They've got a really unique mission, and they have 3 missions, and I'll go easy to hard. So the easy mission is they are the centralized credentialing organization for the entire Army Reserve structure. They manage the medical credentials for about 7,300 providers. They're responsible for keeping those files current at all times and for generating what we call ICTBs, for those that are familiar with that. And whenever somebody's going to go off and they need to be privileged in order to practice their specialty. The second mission is that they manage all of our providers that are in some sort of student status, whether it's medical residency, fellowships, or we've got, say, nurses going off to CRNA school or nurse practitioner school, utilizing something called Specialized Training Assistance Program, or STRAP, which is a stipend program to allow people to get advanced degrees. They're all managed by APMC. And they have no military duty responsibility other than to complete their education program, and APMC manages that population until they graduate and then gets them assigned to a unit. The most complicated mission, and this started way back in 1979 with First Army, is they manage providers who need flexibility in how and when they're able to provide or perform their military duty. And what do I mean by that? So, think about a doctor I'm going to use doctor as an example. It's not just doctors, but primarily physicians. Think about the demands of their profession. Up before the crack of dawn, seeing patients at the hospital, either in clinic or in the OR, back at the hospital in the evening, and then they get home. And then we're asking them to, serve quote unquote, 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks in the summer, in a very rigid kind of style whenever their unit happens to schedule drill. And that gets to be very difficult. And so for strategic reasons, from a recruitment and retention standard reasons, First Army, way back in 1979, created this thing called the First Army AMED Augmentation Detachment, or the FAD. And what they allowed doctors to do was join the Army, get assigned to a unit, but then be attached back to them for management. And they offered them flexibility in how and when they provided or performed their military duty. And so that mission has morphed over the course of 44 years now, and APMC has that. And I say it's misunderstood because it comes with a lot of angst for commanders who have doctors assigned to their organization, but they don't necessarily see them. They certainly don't see them on a frequent basis. And so that commander is still on the hook for the readiness of that provider, but APMC is doing all the administrative support and management. So it's a little bit of a quirky kind of arrangement, but it's incredibly important, again, from a retention and recruitment standpoint. So that is the generating force primarily managed by AR Medcom. Next slide, please. Then our operating force. So I know we have some regular Army folks on the channel here. You all are probably well aware of the 18th Medical Command out in the Pacific. Well, we have two similar commands in the reserve. There's currently only 3 medical commands in the Army, one in the regular Army, and then 2 in the reserve. So I mentioned them already. It's 3rd Medical Command in Atlanta, where I belong currently, where I'm assigned, and then the 807th out west. Underneath both of those 2 divisions, we have 10 full medical brigades, so double the number that the active component has, 8 multifunctional medical battalions. And for those that aren't familiar with what that is, if you remember, 10, 12 years ago, evacuation battalion, area support medical battalion, medical logistics battalion, well, we rolled them all into one headquarters, and now we have a multifunctional medical battalion, which provides command and control for all of that. As a matter of fact, that unit, that organization provides basically command and control for 8 out of the 10 medical functions. It is absolutely a gem of a command. Then you can see our hospitals. We have 10 or 12 hospital centers with 24 field hospitals, and then all the accompanying augmentation attachments. This is part of that redesign that occurred just a few years ago, which I'll talk about more in a few minutes. But essentially, one hospital center, 2 field hospitals, and 4 augmentation detachments provide you 240 beds, which is very similar to what the old combat support hospital provided. We just made them much more modular so that we could plug and play based on mission requirements. And I won't read through all of these, but you can see the number of 25 forward resuscitative surgical detachments and then all the companies. We have a plethora of all the enabling capability that's necessary to provide force health protection and health service support across theater of operation. Next slide. So how much do we actually have from an operating standpoint in the reserve component? Well, when you put the National Guard and the reserve together, we're almost 70% of the Army's operational medical capability. And you can see the breakdowns there. For those that are not familiar with the difference between the Guard and reserve, back in 1993, there was a big reorganization. And to keep it simple, the Guard basically got all the combat arms and a chunk of the combat support capability. The reserves picked up all the combat service support and a chunk of the combat support capability. And because the Guard is primarily maneuver force, you can imagine most of their medical capability is Role 1, Battalion 8 Station, Charlie Med. And then they have a few area support medical companies, a few multifunctional medical battalions, and a few ground ambulance companies, and some air ambulance companies as well. Everything else is essentially in the reserve, all the Role 3, actually all the medical enabling capability is in the reserve component. So PM, vet, combat stress, blood, etc. Next, please. So now I want to talk a little bit more about nursing. So I got the slides a little bit of a weird order here, but let me just talk a little bit about nursing. And in order to keep this on class, I'm not going to give you a specific numbers of authorizations by AOC or what we're authorized from a force structure. Let me just say that we're authorized approximately somewhere in the near number of 3,000 nurses in the reserve. And all was going well until 2017. In 2017, as you're all aware, Congress mandated military health system reform. And that required all of the military treatment facilities to be basically put underneath control and authority of the Defense Health Agency. Well, at the time, General Milley, Mark Milley, who was the chief of staff of the Army, realized that if we're no longer responsible for the hospitals, then I should not be responsible for backfilling those hospitals when I pull providers out to go to war. So he asked for the Army to be relieved of that backfill mission, and that request was granted. When General Milley was looking ahead, he realized that he was going to be able to recoup some medical provider spaces in the Army and convert them to create, at the time, what was the catchword, more lethality. He could create more trigger pullers and provide more lethality, more combat capability for the Army. And there was a really disgusting number that popped up of how many people we were going to cut across the structure. And thankfully, Congress got involved and stopped that before it happened, because there was not enough analysis done about what that really meant with DHA taking over the hospitals, ensuring we had adequate staff. God forbid we get into a large scale combat operation, etc. So they put a freeze on that, but they didn't put a freeze on it before the Army Reserve took the cuts that we were allocated. And AR Medcom, Army Reserve Medical Command, that I talked about, the generating team, their primary mission prior to 2019 was to backfill the MTFs. Not only was it to generate the force, but it was also to be the primary backfill command. They had relationships with most of our hospitals around the country, and they were providing the backfill. They took a hit of 2,440 positions, and I think that may have happened when General Link was commanding, or right around that time. And so, 2,440 positions, almost 1,000 of that was nurses, right out the gate. So we'll talk about that. So that's the first thing that happened. Right around the same time, 2017, the Army started doing its force design update on the combat support hospital. So a force design update, basically, you reorganize organizations, and the combat support hospital was reorganized into a hospital center, field hospital, and accompanying augmentation detachments. Basically broke one hospital into 7 different pieces that could be plug and play together as needed, as I mentioned. Well, the Army Reserve had 14 combat support hospitals when that started. We were reduced down to 12 hospital centers. So 1406 combat support hospital commands to 12. So we lost 2 hospitals worth of capability. But to add, insult to injury, we had grade plate reductions across the entire structure that happened at the same time. So lieutenant colonel positions reduced to major, major to captain, and so forth. And so while we're losing positions, we also lost grade. We also lost positions by grade. Everything was reduced. So it just added injury, insult to injury that, over the process, the problem of losing 2,440 positions plus. On top of that, we have Army Recruiting Command out there doing a fantastic job of recruiting. And as they've had problems with since Desert Storm, they weren't able to hit the mission requirements for physicians. So we might have a total medical mission of 300 providers that we needed. Most of them would have been physicians. When they couldn't recruit physicians, they over-recruited nurses and medical service corps. And if it was 300, the total number for the year, then they got 300, but it happened to be 100 too many nurses or 100 too many medical service corps. We were good because we got 300. And so they were adding to the pipeline, way too many people, and basically overachieving on missions for nurses and medical service corps. And then the fourth piece of all this was no control over ROTC and who was being commissioned in the nurse corps. We knew about the folks that had scholarships, but there was a bunch of people that didn't have scholarships that were also commissioning. And again, it was hitting medical service and nurses really, really hard. When all this hit, what happened for the Army Reserve, next slide, please, is essentially we became about 1,000 nurses over strength. It was just around 900 and change. So I eliminated the authorization numbers here, but I want to show you what happened 2019 to 2020. So you can see down the left-hand side, all of the AOCs. In the third column, with the red header, MHS reform reductions, you can see the number of reductions that Army Reserve took for each of the AOCs. You can see at the end of the fourth quarter of 2019, so basically September 30th, what our strength numbers look like for each one of those AOCs. And then after the cuts, the far right-hand column, first quarter of 2020, you can see what happened to the strength numbers. Now, I'd like to point your attention to nurse anesthetist, 66 bucks. So here we are going along. Everything is great. Literally December 30th which is right at the end of the first quarter of 2020, we are 45% under strength for nurse anesthetists. We were incentivizing the heck out of those folks. Sign-on bonuses, retention bonuses. I mean, they were making a lot of money because we needed them because we were so short. Well, January 1st, 550 positions were eliminated, and we went from 45% under strength the day before to 30% over strength in literally 24 hours. And you can see the impacts across all of the AOCs. So right before the cuts, we were just over 100% strength for the core, and then we became 30% over strength. Like I said, almost 900 nurses. As you can imagine, that had a significant impact on promotions. If any of you are out on Facebook or on any of the nurse mentorship program, channels out on social media, I'm sure you've seen, reserve nurses just beside themselves over non-selections at promotion boards, and a lot of folks are being separated because we had to right size the force. Next slide, please. And the way it was done was basically through the promotion system. Now, there was opportunities for people to branch transfer, but it was to primary branches, basic branches, was not within medical. So we were asking people if they would voluntarily like to go become a civil affairs officer, like logistician, but it would not be within nursing or even within the AMED. So as I mentioned, it impacted promotions. Now, for those that aren't familiar with Army Reserve, we have 3 different statuses that our soldiers can serve in. So really quickly, you heard I was active guard and reserve. AGR, Congress authorizes about 16,500 of our overall end strength to be on full-time active duty. It's called the AGR program. Those are the folks that are charged with maintaining the readiness, doing the logistics, most of the planning, keeping the lights on and the equipment ready so that we can train on weekends. That's a very simplified explanation of what they do. But so we have the AGR team, about 16,500. For nurses, it's just over 100 total nurses in the AGR program. And so because it's such a small population, the impact was not as dramatic for them. You can see here in the 3 different columns, major, lieutenant, colonel, FY21 through 23, kind of the impact. That first gray line at the top shows you the number of people that were considered for promotion. That's above the zone and in the zone. That does not include below the zone. We didn't consider any below the zones during this time period. And then the second gray line shows you the number selected. So for instance, major FY21, there was only 1 that was considered and 1 was selected. So it was 100% selection rate in the green. You can see the selection rates. Not terrible. Of course, colonel's tight because the positions are much less. We only have 9 AGR Nurse Corps colonel positions. So that is a very, very competitive promotion. But you can see that the AGRs fared pretty well. Next slide, please. But our TPU folks did not. So the other 2 statuses that soldiers can serve in is True Program Unit or TPU, which is your traditional reserve, 1 week, again, 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year, if it was only true. And the individual mobilization augmentee, which many of you may not have heard of, that is actually reserve positions that reside on active duty manning rosters. And they're basically wartime expansion capability. And what's nice about an IMA position is it might be at MedCom, it might be at the Surgeon General's office, it will be in different active duty formations. There's flexibility in how the reserve soldier performs their duty. They work that out with their supervisor. They might come in for a week at a time or for 2 weeks at a time to work through their drill weekends and then, spend a couple of weeks in the summer. So it's a really great opportunity because you get some time on with the active duty folks. There's some flexibility in how you do duty, but when it comes to promotion, the IMA and the TPU are looked at together. So you can see again, here you can see the impact of that overstrength and kind of how, the ship has been righted. And I hate to say it that way, because that's exactly what happened. For instance, captains, FY21, 135 above the zone, 182 in the zone. So 317 were considered, only 50 selected. So a selection rate of 16% promotion rate. And just look across that green row, and you can see just how tough it's been. So I think everybody's well aware we're an upper out organization by federal law. If you're a 2-time non-select, federal law says you have to be separated from military service within 7 months and 1 day of the promotion board results being published. There's only a few exceptions for people to be extended. One of them is something called selective continuation, which the Chief of the Army Reserve has used that quite a bit to retain some of our folks, but we have bled captains, lieutenants, captains, and majors significantly here in the last 3 years. Where we're at currently. It's just to kind of give you an idea. So if you remember back to 2019, we were 104% as a core. just before all the cuts happened. We're now back down to about 107%. We're just about where we need to be, with a few exceptions. And so, in talking with the AMED personnel proponent directorate down at the Med Center of Excellence, promotion rates look to be much more positive this year, and then definitely back to normal next year. So I think we're about weathered the storm at this point, and we're back just about within where we need to be. You can see we do have some issues though. Nurse anesthetists, again, currently sitting at 150% strength. Family nurse practitioners, 350% strength. Psychiatric, nurse practitioners, 240% strength. So we still do have some issues where we're overstrength in certain areas, but as a core and a whole, we're just about back to where we were 2019. Now, can we go back a slide, Nikki? So I always get asked this. I get asked, like, sir, what can I do to increase my chances for promotion? And I think this transcends all components. And I believe there may even be some folks here in the Air Force, and I think some of this will run true for you as well. So what I will tell you is what I'm about to offer you is what I have been taught. And General Link has, shared some of this with me. So I'm sharing some of the things that were shared with me over the course of my career. In order to set yourself up for what we call to be best qualified at a promotion board. So fully qualified means you meet all the minimum requirements to be eligible for the board. You never want to just be fully qualified when you go to the board. You want to be best qualified because it's a competition. We're going to pick the best people. And so how do you become best qualified? Well, the first thing you have to do, and this may come of a shock to some of you that have never been in a reserve component, you have to have diversity in assignments. And what do I mean by that? Well, it's not unheard of in the reserve for somebody to join a unit, and that unit becomes family, and they never leave the unit their entire career. They stay in that same organization and they just change positions as they promote. Or they take different positions inside that unit. And while I understand that, and I spent 12 years in one unit, so I get that, and I understand what it's like to belong to a reserve unit where that really becomes a second family. You're doing yourself a disservice. You're doing the military a disservice because you only know how the Army runs from that one unit's perspective, or how there's a culture and an organization, and you just know that organization. In order to be a great officer, you need to understand how the Army runs from different perspectives and at different echelons. You got to be at company, battalion, brigade level. You got to be in MTO. You got to be in TDA structure. It's difficult, but it's not impossible. And we make it a little bit easier in the Army Reserve because we offer something called lodging in kind and IDT travel, where we help reimburse up to $500 for travel expenses to get you to your unit of assignment for a drill weekend. And then as long as funding is available, we'll give you also a free bed to sleep in while you're there. So there's some incentives there to help with that, but you have to be diverse. You have to be well-rounded. You can't understand the Army only from one perspective. The second thing, civilian education. You have to have a minimum master's degree by the time you come up for lieutenant colonel. This generally is not an issue for the nurse corps. Nowadays, where most of our folks are getting doctorates, almost everybody's got a master's, at least one. Heck, some people have multiple, doctorates at this point. So that's usually not an issue for us. Where our big issue comes in is military education. So by regulation, the only thing that is required that you have to do as a nurse is basic course, what we call BOLIC now. And so I have to have this conversation with nurses a lot because they are not really into going to the military PME because they're focused on their nursing career. But you have to remember, we're dual professionals. We are a professional in the profession of nursing. We're a professional in the profession of arms. So I use the analogy to kind of help make my point. Imagine graduating from nursing school, passing your NCLEX, and then never taking another continuing education hour for the rest of your nursing career. And my question to you is, how relevant will you be at the bedside? Well, you're not going to be very relevant really quickly. And why? Because science is constantly evolving. New procedures, new techniques, new medications, new approaches. We go to continuing education so we can stay abreast of that and we can provide great quality care at the bedside. Okay, now let's go to the profession of arms. You finish your commissioning program or you direct commission and you go to BOLIC and you graduate. You're now in the same position of that nurse who just finished school and passed the NCLEX. And if all you do is BOLIC and never do another continuing education hour, how relevant will you be for the Army as a soldier? Well, not very relevant very quickly. Why? Because the threat environment is constantly changing. And what happens? National security strategy changes, the national military strategy changes, doctrine changes, TTPs change. How we do things changes. Why? Because we have to change to the threat. And if you're not keeping abreast of that, how are you then, as you move up the ranks and you start to take on leadership positions, how are you then formulating recommendations from your commander when you're not educated on what's going on? When you don't understand the operational space or the strategic space, especially when you get to the senior leader levels, how do you expect to be a colonel when you're not going to, when you're not going to war college? You have to put the same rigor into the profession of arms as you do the profession of nursing. We have to do both. And I'll tell you, this is one of the ways that nurses can separate themselves from their peers very quickly. Go to all the PME schools, and in the Army Reserve, as soon as you graduate from what used to be called Command and General Staff College, now ILE, there's a whole slew of additional courses that open up called Additional Professional Development Education. And they're competitive. You have to apply for them and opt in for them. But they start getting you into more education at the operational strategic level. For instance, there's a 4-month course taught by the Army War College called the Defense Strategy Course. Spends 2 months at the operational level, 2 months at the strategic level, and it literally is a mini snapshot of the distance education program of the Senior Service College. Some of the articles that I read in Defense Strategy course, I reread in War College when I went to the War College. So that's a very easy way, but you've got to put the rigor in to the profession of arms, just like you do the profession of nursing. The next one, which always baffles me, especially when it's time for evaluations or fitness reports for any of our Air Force folks. When I'm rating or senior rating somebody, and we do our initial counseling, I kind of give them my expectations, and they meet those expectations, and then they're surprised that I'm giving them a center mass Met standards eval. It always baffles me. If you do what I ask, you've met standards. That's center mass. Okay. Listen, we're kind of a unique organization in that we have to work together in order for the team to be successful. But at the same time, you're still competing with your peer to your right and left. So it's kind of a weird situation. But here's what I've done. I've always tried, no matter what position I've been put in, to try to, exceed expectations. If my rater asked me to do A, B, and C, I tried to figure out how to do A, B, C, and D. I tried to optimize, expand, grow, whatever it was. I wanted to make sure that I was doing something more than I was being asked. I was fighting to ensure that when it came time for my fitness report, for my evaluation, I didn't want my senior rater ever to have to think about who was getting the top lock. As I put it, I will help all my friends around me, and anybody who's on here that has worked with me knows that I will go out of my way, stay up till 2 a.m. helping you, but I'm not letting you out hustle me. You have to perform. And if you are an officer in the military, nobody should be coming to tell you that you have to do your medical readiness exams, that you have to take a PT test or go, meet height and weight. That is just a given. Needs to be done. The last thing I'll offer is you have to be well read. Okay. And you don't have to spend a bunch of time reading, heavy, stuff on strategic topics and, on our threat, adversaries, those kinds of things. But what you do have to do, 100% must do, is read doctrine. And I'll give you, I'll tell you why. I mean, if you're not reading doctrine, and especially for medical, a couple of things you have to read. You have to read FM 3.0, operations. You have to understand how we fight as an Army. And you have to read FM 4.02, Army Health Systems. You need to understand how the organization you belong to fits into the Army Health System, whether it's providing health service support or force health protection. If you don't understand it, again, how are you building recommendations for your commander? How are you generating options for senior leaders? You need to understand doctrine in order to be able to speak it, in order to be able to understand it, and in order to be able to be relevant. So I hope that's helpful. I think that transcends all components. Nikki, can we go ahead 2 slides? I'm almost done. Okay, so let's talk about very briefly just some of the challenges and some of the opportunities that we have in the Army Reserve. So one of the things that you might find surprising is we have no 06 authorization currently at Army Reserve headquarters. We have no senior leader, basically, that's helping lead the Corps writ large across the organization. I told you our medical commands are 3 co-equal commands, all direct reports to Army Reserve. We have no 06 authorization in Army Reserve Command right now. The current USAR surgeon just made a formal request for a colonel, which is great. So now we've got to figure out how to support that. So what we're doing right now is we're relying on our 06 colonel that's right next door at Forces Command. closest colonel to the operational force. That's Colonel Laura Capito, and she's on the line tonight. And Laura's kind of helping to serve as that senior leader for us, and that's going really well. Another thing that we have to do, that we do, we rely heavily on our civilian employers. One, to maintain clinical competency, and two, to provide the specialties that we need in the force. And so you're probably thinking, what? So, on reserve, all those units I mentioned, we don't have any equipment. We're all deployable. There's no brick and mortar. So there's no place that we're going to actually practice nursing or provide nursing care during our weekend drills. So we're relying on civilian employment to maintain that competency. Now, many of you heard that we've got ICTLs coming up here. They're getting ready to implement those. It's, critical task list by AOC. They've worked years on getting these down. This will definitely help us validate competency. We just have to come up with a strategy in the Army Reserve how we're actually going to do that. There's going to be some reliance on civilian employers for people that are actually practicing. But I cannot tell you with 100% confidence right now that if somebody tells me that they're a 66 Sierra, that they legitimately are a 66 Sierra. I could be a good example. If I was carrying 66 Tango right now, I haven't worked in the ER in 20 years. And we have not cleaned that up. So that's an issue that, we own, and something that we're working at. The other thing is we don't have the funding to send nurses off to become specialized. So we can't send a 66 hotel. We can to the Sierra and Tango course, but we have to pay for it out of unit funds, which we can't do. It's just too expensive. We don't have the funds to put somebody on orders for 4 to 5 months or 6 months to go through the courses. We do have that STRAT program, as I mentioned, specialized training assistance program for people that are doing advanced programs like CRNA and nurse practitioner programs. That's separate, but we don't have the ability to send people to AOC generating schools. The other thing is we've lacked a historical connection to the Corps Chief's office. We've had connections, but it's been personality driven. So sometimes it's been close, other times it's been none at all. Nikki, next slide. And so we're working really hard to close that gap. I'm not sure if everybody's tracking this. We currently have 3 reserve general officers that were nurses. So there's myself, my good friend and counterpart, Brigadier General Kate Simonson, who's also at 3rd Medical Command with me now. And then over in the National Guard, we've got Brigadier General Charlene Dalto. I don't know, maybe a year ago, maybe a little more than that, I reached out to General Davis when he was the Corps Chief, and I said, Jack, this is maybe the only time that we've had, or at least in recent memory, where we've had a GO in all 3 components that are, nurses. If we don't take advantage of this, shame on us. And he's like, no, you're right. So we began an effort to try and pull the Corps, all 3 components together. And that's still work. It's ongoing. So of course, General Davis retired a little bit suddenly. Nobody was tracking. I then worked with Colonel Williamson Younts very closely. We advanced the ball a little bit. Of course, Hub got picked up for command out at Madigan, so she's out in Washington commanding now. And I have not yet engaged with Colonel Schroeder. See, I got called away at a phone call when I was making my slides. So Colonel Schroeder, I need to engage with her. But General Simonson, General Dalto, myself, and the Corps Chief have been working this now here for about 6 months. What we're trying to do, and we've got Surgeon General support on this, is we're going to create an Assistant Corps Chief on an additional duty appointment memo by the TSG for Compo 2 and Compo 3. And they will work as peers with the Deputy Chief, and it'll link Compo 2 and 3 together with the Corps Chief's office. What we really want to do is seek out opportunities to leverage the full capability and capacity of the entire Corps across Compo. Training opportunities, leader development opportunities. We want to fix communication channels so that when different opportunities present, we can get that information out. And so I already mentioned we suffer with communication across Compo, but we suffer internally in the Army Reserve with Corps communication. And that's where Colonel Capito comes in. She and a group of other Army nurse leaders have been working their tail off to help close the gaps with that. We've got a new Teams page up. They got a ton of central data being captured there. We're getting information out about award opportunities, educational opportunities. We got mentorship program kicked off again. There's just a lot of really good things going. So we're looking to build off of that. And then the last big one that just recently happened in the last year or so is the Surgeon General now is appointing reserve consultants to the Surgeon General who bring not only AOC specialty, but Compo, subject matter expertise to the conversation. And we've now appointed, I believe, 3 nurse consultants and we're still in the process of filling the rest of those. So those are some of the some of the challenges that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, some of the opportunities, some of the big things that we're working on. So I think that's all I have, Nikki. Next slide. Yeah, that's it. So I know that was a lot. I have no idea how long that took me. Um, but I am ready to take questions. I can look at them. Let me see here. All right, so first one I can see here, a recently published article on the integration of acute care nurse practitioners in military medicine journal. It outlines 4 potential areas of impact that utilization of ACNPs within the ANC would benefit service members. Which command committee could I present this info to and hopefully spark a conversation? Oh, I used to ask I used to ask this question all the time. Um, so where the best start with that? So Robert, here's the one thing I'll tell you. Any changes we make have to be made. So if we're going to change an MTO in any organization, it's got to be standardized across the entire Army. So a Compa 1 field hospital that now has a nurse practitioner, Compa 3 field hospital has to have a nurse practitioner. I probably would start with force management up at OTSG, and I would speak with Mr. Peter Calamaris. That's where I would start. And Peter would steer you in the right direction and tell you if it's even within the realm of possible or who you need to talk with. He's all things force management from the Army standpoint, and everything will end up on his desk anyway. So I'd start with Peter Calamaris at OTSG Force Management. Okay. All right. General Link brought up on a must-nav must-nav event. She called it a PHA. I believe it's pre-deployment readiness.
So let me go back
Okay.
for a minute,
Yeah.
General Traver, because I was asking for clarification. What
Ah,
Joe had originally said was, are the reserve components having any issues with medical readiness appointments at MTFs? And then I asked him to clarify what he meant by medical readiness appointments, and
PHA.
so that's his answer.
Okay. So
To give
PHA, for
some
those that
context.
remember way back, the 5-year physical, it's now an annual assessment instead of every 5 years. So it's called a periodic health assessment or PHA. So the, the simple answer is yes and no. Depends on the MTF. So every MTF is supposed to support reserve component personnel utilizing the platform, but it's on a space available basis and with prior coordination. So I do know that the DHA, is supporting. There's tons of guidance that's been put out there with regards to reserve component utilization of MTFs. What I will tell you is that if you plan to use the MTF, you need to plan well in advance. You got to coordinate, you got to communicate, can't just show up. And in most cases, they're able to support you. They're supposed to support you. If you're getting any pushback, then I would just run it up your chain of command and let us handle that at the top level. But um, I know for a fact that the DHA director is 100% on board, and the MTF commanders are supposed to know that they're supposed to support us on a space available basis. Okay, Bob Moore, Colonel Moore, has APMC picked up the MedPros management for assigned personnel so it does not reflect on assigned unit medical readiness? Yes and no, again. So they do track MedPros and they do work MedPros management for the unit, but at the end of the day, the USR still falls on the unit commander. There's no way to separate um, that assigned personnel from the USR. So I can tell you that at least when I was commander, I can't speak for what's happening now. Um, Tracking the medical readiness and taking responsibility. I called it like joint parenting. We had the soldier as the primary parent, and the unit got him on weekends. They were like the weekend custodial parent or whatever. I told them that we needed to be good parent and that we need to take on the responsibility for the readiness. Now, what you're not tracking, Bob, is that while readiness is still important, it's no longer the number one priority that we're focused on. We're taking some risk in not actually doing metric management anymore. The CAR is really focusing and pushing us to get back to training, realistic training, MOS AOC competency, warrior tasks competency to ensure we can survive on a battlefield. And we're right now focusing as we come out of COVID on platoon level tasks and competencies. But the focus now is on training and logistics, and less so on metrics management. The expectation is that commanders manage their readiness metrics and that frontline supervisors take on the responsibility When I say frontline supervisors, primarily NCOs take on a responsibility for the readiness of their teams. So that's kind of where we've gone. Okay. General Link put in here, yes, however, most of that structure was lost. Yes, yes, ma'am. So the 2,440 positions that were cut out of the Army Reserve many of them were unfilled. I think we only had about 160 people, if I remember right, that were actually filling those positions. But the numbers, when they were cut, basically it affected the histograms, it affected the promotion capability, it affected the incentives that we're able to offer, because all of those positions that, even though they were unfilled, with the unstrengths being as low as they were, we were able to incentivize them and promote into the vacant positions. When they went away, we all of a sudden became overstrength, and there was no place to promote anybody, and we lost most of the incentives. And General Link also said most of the physician and nurse anesthetist structure was built to support 90-day rotation, and that's also correct. So for those not tracking, we had two different policies in the Army for two different groups of people. We have a 90-day rotation policy, what we call 90-day BOG, and 180-day BOG. And so for certain specialties, when they deployed, they would only go for 90 days at a time and they would be replaced. So if you can imagine a unit's being deployed for a full year, some of the personnel on that unit are going to turn over every 90 days. Therefore, we need 4 people for one position. And so some of that structure that was built in that we lost was part of that 90-day rotation calculation. The good news is, ma'am, if you're not tracking some of that, they're fighting to get some of that back. Backfill is back on the map. We're able to talk about it again because everybody realizes we cut too deep, and there may be some gains coming back to us. So fingers crossed. We'll see how that plays out. Bob Moore, never say no to a deployment. Agreed. Good news is, Bob, you commissioned for life, so we can still call you back. All right, Kendra Johnson. Hey. All right, I've been FY23 Lieutenant Colonel PZ Select. I've reached out to HRC Talent Management twice with no reply. I have a list of TPU 66P and 66N positions with the unit name, but no POC name under it. I need direction and assistance. Hey, just shoot me an email and I'll be happy to help you out, Kendra. No problem. Good to see you on here. All right, Sarah Foster. As a reservist, I'm on a mission currently as a hospital backfill. How is that possible? Okay, so yeah, here you go. Perfect example. We don't have enough providers to fill all of our positions across the force. And so we just did an analysis to see kind of how many reserve personnel are still being asked to come in and fill positions in hospitals. And it's significant. It's like 400 people a year right now. They're still needed, all the MTFs. Just because, we were relieved of that mission doesn't mean that the need went away. And so the way it works is the MTF identifies a requirement. They coordinate with MedCom. MedCom has to come up with the funding, and then they put out a request for a soldier off of a tour of duty, and they actually fund your mission that you're on right now. So that's how that works. All right, Patricia Justice, you mentioned War College, and yet most reserve nurses do not get a slot due to active duty nurses and AGR receiving a slot. I can count on one hand for those in the reserves who achieved and received a slot, especially in the Western region. Now that I'm retired, but trying to keep my thumb on the pulse. Oh, now that I'm now retired, but keep my thumb on the pulse. So what I would tell you, Patricia, is that all the things I offered on how to ensure that you have success in the military needs to be taught to our lieutenants early on, because by the time you become a lieutenant colonel, if you haven't had diverse assignments, you haven't had, a lot of top block OERs, you haven't, hit all of the metrics on that education. There's a reason to go to additional professional development education on top of the fact that you need the education. It demonstrates that you're a lifelong learner, and it makes you more competitive at the boards. Up to colonel, and for schools, selections are based on not only past performance, but on demonstrated potential, which is captured in the senior rate of blocking, right? And so, you can't wait to the nth hour and then try to make the correction. It's too late to make that course correction. So the way that you get competitive for War College is do everything I mentioned, and you start early in your career. That's how you increase your chances. I know that there's, been nurses out there that have gone, but you're right. It's not a lot. You have to compete for it. All right. Bob Moore. Wow, no 06. Yeah, no 06 Bob at USAR right now. That position was moved to OCAR, and they have separated the headquarters. OCAR and USAR are no longer a one staff, it's two separate staffs. So R06 position is now the Director of Clinical Operations at OCAR with strategic and policy focus and no operational tieback. Sarah Foster. Also, how can you get a top lock when the rater rates AGR nurses at the same time? Call me. I'll tell you how you can do it. I can guarantee you that you can out hustle your AGR nurses. It can be done. You're gonna have to work for it, and nothing's gonna be given to you, but you can do it. Shoot me an email, Sarah, and I'll be happy to get on a call one-on-one with you. Okay, lastly, I'm seeing that M9 nurses are not up to end strength, so that's a plus for those who have the M9. That's correct. We're still short there. Okay, I think that's all the answers for all the questions.
Yes,
You
we
wanna-
have some that were submitted earlier, but we're about at our hour, so.
Okay, I
I
mean, I'm
don't
happy
know
to
if
stay
you wanna
on.
stay on. A lot of them you answered already, because a lot of them had to do with how to get promoted, finding schools. This is one, why won't they make the, I assume this is the Captain's Career Course, CCC, a requirement for Army Reserve nurses, especially with the competitiveness of the recent promotion boards. Without it being a requirement, it's fighting an uphill battle to get a seat as a nurse since it's not mill ed required.
So, it's a can of worms, and I don't probably want to get into it all the way. So, I personally, if we were asking Todd Traver's opinion, I'd make all the schools mandatory. That's my opinion. However, so there's a lot of factors that play here. School seats, instructors, platform space down at Fort Sam, etc. We have beat this thing to death at the General Officer Steering Committee level for the past decade. What I can tell you is they've made some changes. So basically, up until August 1st, the first 100 seats go to Medical Service Corps because they have to have it. But after that, the seats open up and it's first come, first serve. So it's a lot easier for you to get in, but you got to be Johnny on the spot. Make sure you've got your ATARS applications in right around the August 1st timeframe.
Let's see, there's a couple of others that might be interesting. You'll have to forgive me because I don't know
Okay.
this acronym. Where do you foresee training for nurses in the LSMO environment?
Oh, LISCO environment. Talking about LISCO, I'm assuming. Um, so the primary spot for us right now is through our global medic and regional medic exercises, as you all know, at least the folks that are in the reserve. That's where we can get, we get our collective training. And those exercises are being morphed to get us away from counterinsurgency that we've been doing for 20 years and moving us more towards, how we're going to provide healthcare in a large scale ground combat operation, multi-domain environment. So, there's a lot of future concepts that are being worked right now. There is a lot of things in play as we try to figure out, how do we provide healthcare when we can no longer set up a huge static hospital? I mean, take a look at Ukraine. Everywhere they set up, or Russia, everywhere they set up a static hospital, it's been hit. So you can't put a big Taj Mahal hospital up anymore and expect it to survive. So what does that mean? Well, one of the things they're toying with right now is something called a division hospital. Happens to look a lot like a MASH when I look at it, but mobile. So, what was old is new again for a lot of reasons. As far as training, clinical training is difficult, as you know, in the reserve. You're going to have to do and get most of that, unfortunately, through the civilian sector. Where you're going to get it for us is basically in the collective training exercises.
Thank you. Our ANCA historian would like to know, is it true from the 2012 to 2021, most deployments were served by the reserves and National Guard Army nurses?
Wait, can you say that one more time?
Sure. Is it true that from 2012 to 2021, most deployments were served by the Reserve and National Guard Army nurses?
I cannot confirm that
Yeah.
with certainty. I know we had a significant amount of deployments during that time. The vast majority of the nurses deployed with the combat support hospitals. So, I mean, we'd have to go back and see which hospitals deployed and figure out which component. Now, we were certainly in the rotation frequently, but I can't tell you with confidence that the majority were reserve component. I mean, at the time, we were significantly larger as a corps. Um, we were the active duty has more nurses than we do now, but at the time we were probably 1,000 nurses more than active component. So, I mean, there's a chance that just based on numbers, we probably did a little more, but I can't say that we did the majority of it. Okay. I'm going to be honest with you, Kendra. I don't have a, so she's asking about, she served at the MO platform at Fort Hood and, talking about people showing up with undisclosed medical and behavioral health conditions. Um, and wants to know what the reserve, how, what the reserve is doing to connect the medical/commanders to the MFGI sites. Um, I'm not sure if you're asking me like prior to units arriving at the MFGI sites, or are you talking about future?
Do you want us to unmute her mic, sir?
Sure.
Good evening, sir. Can you hear me?
I
Yes,
can
we
hear you, Kendra.
Okay, so basically my question is really should have been the first bluff up front. So I have been here at Fort Bliss for 2 years, and prior to that was Fort Hood. So I've done 3 years back to back of being a provider, with this last year being Fort Bliss SRPC provider OIC. The structure of the National Guard is what it is, and it's easier to reach out. I've worked with probably about 8 different state DS
Sure.
this past year, with prior to, what COCOM they're going to, what letter stabilities, what is actually required to get a soldier to UCOM, AFRICOM, SOUTHCOM, so forth. However, the reserve structure seems to be a little bit more complicated. When some of the reserve units arrive, the commanders just kind of like look at me like, oh, medical. And I start talking about COCOMs and have to do a sit down introduction. And honestly, I understand that medical staff are only going to have access to MHS Genesis JLB down to a certain level. And I don't know if that's changed compared to when we had Alta. Alta stopped at the battalion level of our medical units. And with the new structure, I'm not certain how that actually is now in the world of the reserves, because I've been on active duty and at these MFGI sites. But one thing that I have noticed is that our reserve, our commanders, our medical LNOs, they're not prepared. When they get on ground, for example, Fort Bliss, they've only got X amount of days, and maybe 14 days, maybe 28 days. And medical has been a hard stop, even though they could be the best trained.
Sure.
Letter stabilities and most importantly, sending up, medical waivers to get them approved. So my question is, what is the reserves doing? Is there like a communication line out there to get the reserves prepared, like on these IPR calls that I know Fort Bliss does, because I wrote some of the IPR PowerPoint slides for last year.
So I don't think any of the deploying units are talking with the actual MOB platforms. Most of the MOB work's being done through their chain of command
Okay.
with support from the readiness division. So the readiness divisions, along with the MSC command, the major support command, supported command, has the responsibility for preparing those units for deployment and tracking them. It's not what it was during the height of the wars when we were running people through massive level 1 and level 2. We do have level 2 events now happening again at the readiness divisions. Beyond that, there, I don't have anything else to offer. I mean, I'm honestly not in the medical readiness space anymore, believe it or not. I finally broke away from that. So it's not something that I spend a lot of time and energy focused on right now. So I don't have a good answer for you, but I can dig into that and talk with our MOB team and kind of get a feel for how they're managing that. I'm focused primarily on the operational fight in the Middle East. So,
sir, it's been a pleasure speaking with you again, because I know we go way back to the 7th Ward 5 CB, and so appreciate your mentorship.
All right. So, okay. And then Mike Janik asked about, can you give more examples of diverse assignments? So, Mike, what I would recommend is like, bounce around between FRSD. You got to get time at a field hospital. You need to understand you have to understand role 3. It means the major muscle mover in Army medicine. You have to understand how the hospital functions and how it integrates into, delivery of health service support. You can get command positions. Don't sell yourself short from company command. You can move to TDA organizations. You can go over and do some time with AR Medcom. You can look for IMA slots and go over and work with the active component in different locations. So just don't stay in the same type of unit or in the same unit for 20 years. You've got to get out and learn the Army from many different perspectives and at many different echelons. And if you need more, if you want to talk more about that, please email me. For those on Military Global, it's todd.w.traver.mil.
We have another question, sir, from Suzanne Hernandez.
Oh, hey, Sue. Congratulations, Sue, on promotion. First, thank you. How do you standardize this type of information for all nurse or officers? I think if more nurses could get this type of info, we'd retain more. And that's exactly the challenge, Sue, that I was talking about, communicating, out to the field. We've got to figure out how to crack the nut on how we can pull the core together. And it's not, 14 separate hospital organizations with their own leadership teams in there, and then none of us are cross-talking. That's what Colonel Capital's working on. We're trying to get information out as part of what the mentorship program is. We've got a team of majors and lieutenant colonels that are going to start reaching out to lieutenants and captains and start doing some mentoring, and they're going to start elevating the self-identifiers to the senior leaders for additional mentorship. I'm going to take on helping with talking with the colonels and so on and so forth. So what I would ask is everybody on here, and I mentioned it to the folks that I interface with quite frequently, please talk with the lieutenants and the captains and get the information to them about how to succeed. They have to start now if they want to be successful when they get to the senior ranks. It's too hard at that point to course correct. You can't go back and fix 15 years of evaluation history, at the nth hour. So I'd ask you to help me do the same thing, as an 06, help us get that information out, mentor the nurses in your organization. If you haven't connected with Colonel Capital, please do. Please link in with her. We're going to try and start pulling all the 06s together here shortly. Okay. Do we have anything else?
Dawn has a question for you.
Oh, Dawn. Can ANCA help with getting this information out? Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't know if we can push it out somehow and post it on the webpage. I don't know. I'm open to suggestions, Dawn, if we can figure out a way to do it. One thing I'd like to do is get more reserve nurses in ANCA. We certainly don't have enough representation given the number of nurses we have. And I'm guilty. I didn't even know about ANCA until you all called me in 2018. So Dawn called me and says, "Can you speak?" What's ANCA? That's terrible. I've been a nurse for 25 years at that point. So we've got to do a better job of getting information out about the association.
Great.
Anything else?
All
right.
Let's
Oh,
see.
there's more. Bob's tired.
Facebook Army Reserve Nurse is the way. So it looks like there's a group there that.
Correct. I mean, I'll coordinate with the moderators of that page and see if we can't put something together.
And I think the Army Nurse Corps mentorship site on Facebook also has a lot of reserve nurses in it.
Oh yeah. That's a great page.
It is. I'd like to turn it over to the ANCA president, Karen Gaussman, to kind of close us out. And then ask the attendees to drop off and the panelists to stay on for a quick AAR. So Karen, if you can unmute.
Good evening. Thank you very much, Lenny, for being moderator, Nikki for our IT support, and General Traver, your comments have been phenomenal. It was great to better understand the drawdown with the reserves. It pretty much reflected what happened with the active component several years before, as you alluded to. one of the things that I was going to ask is how can we best support the Army Reserves National Guard, and your involvement, engagement with ANCA is truly inspirational, and we appreciate your ongoing support with that. And we are available for you if you have any ideas, recommendations. We welcome those in further discussions. But thank you very much for taking the time this evening to talk with us, to share your insight, and also to better understand what's happening. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Appreciate you.
And again, the recording will be available in a week for ANCA members. So if you want to share this with somebody, that's where it can be found. And we'd love to have them join us again. Only $40 for 2 years. It's a great deal. So thank you.
And one
for-
last comment from Karen. I would like to thank everyone for their service. We're getting ready to celebrate Veterans Day next weekend. And so many of our listeners are veterans, and the other ones will be veterans in the future. And so I thank you for your service. Out of here.
Okay, thank you for joining us.